Welcome to the Buckeye Battle Cry Show, where I discuss college football and weekly topics. I'm your host, Brandon Held. Today's topics, we're going to talk about Week 13 highlights. We're going to discuss the Buckeyes versus Rutgers and recap that game. We'll talk about our top 5 games that we picked last week in review, and a special segment for those of you who have a difficult time with SEC fans. We'll discuss my top 10 rankings, my top 10 most disappointing teams this season, my preview of the game, and Week 14's top 6 games, and my picks. I want to start again by thanking those of you that followed and watched the show. I am proud and honored to have this kind of viewership and follows or subscriptions in my first season. Let's keep this train rolling. Please share my show with your Buckeye loving friends, because around here we know there is no better team and no better fan base than the Ohio State Buckeyes. So again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. So let's go over last week's games, and of course, starting with the Buckeyes taking on Rutgers. So Ohio State went into this game 10-0, and they were hosting Rutgers this week. Rutgers came into the game 5-5, and Ohio State was 33.5-point favorites. Let's start with the obvious topics. There was no Jeremiah Smith and no Carnell Tate for this game, and that's a problem. Not against UCLA or Rutgers, because Ohio State's overall talent and coaching is superior, but it is a potential problem if those guys aren't back starting this week. We, of course, have scUM this week, which I will get into later for my preview of next week. But then it's Big Ten championship and playoff run time. So hopefully the best wide receiver duo in the country returns. Now, moving on to the actual game, things I saw that went well and things that were concerning. We started the game running the ball well, and Bo Jackson looked great. He turned the ball over at the 1-yard line. When you're about to score the first touchdown of the game, it's obviously something you cannot do. Bo knows that, and I'm sure he was just as upset as the rest of us about it. The running game was productive overall in the game, and in the passing game, Julian Sayin performed well considering the circumstances of the best 2 receivers being out of the game, that is. I did not see a lot of separation between the wide receivers and the defenders, so that was concerning. He definitely misses opportunities that are there in the passing game. Julian also likes to go to Max Clare typically as his first option, and I understand why when you see Max Clare's stats for the game. He is a great route running and passing catching tight end, but sometimes he's not the best option on the play, and there are more yards or touchdowns available if you look elsewhere. They showed that in the game where one time he took an out route to Clare, and Brandon Innes was running a deep post corner that was wide open, and it would have been a touchdown, but he took the shorter, easier completion to Max Clare. So something Sayin needs to look at and grow, which is what makes the way that he's playing so good and so much better, is the fact that he has plenty of room to get better, and he's already playing at a Heisman level. He could also improve at the line of scrimmage. So there were several times the Rutgers defense tackled our running backs for a loss, whether it was Jackson or West. Most of those plays that the losses occurred, the defense was in a 7 or 8 man front pre-snap, and obviously they were playing the run. I don't know if Julian Sayin is allowed, but he has to be allowed to audible out of those plays in that defensive formation. If he's allowed and he's just not doing it, then that is a problem. It will only be worse as the level of competition is raised starting this week. So hopefully he has the authority to audible out of run plays against obvious run defenses. Other issues I saw is Ryan Day is too conservative with clock management at the end of the half. The Buckeyes stop Rutgers on fourth down with over a minute left in the game. It's only a 14-3 game, and he lets the clock bleed out instead of calling a timeout and being aggressive on offense. Now, maybe it's because Tate and Smith were out, but also he is just too conservative at times, and maybe it's just because that's who he is. Either way, you want to see your offense get the ball back there and hopefully score some points. Then get the ball again to start the second half and add to your lead. Put the game more out of reach and make the fourth quarter even more difficult for the other team. So let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Overall, you love the defense and you love the defensive performance. There are times when the defensive play calling is a bit conservative as well. There was a 3rd and 10 where the DB was 15 yards off the receiver. The receiver just runs a 10-yard hook route and boom, he catches it first down. Now that's not elite defense. And I don't understand why the defensive back is so far off the receiver on a 3rd and 10, but that's conservative play calling. He was probably playing some type of zone and it was a safe defense. Instead of getting off the field on 3rd and 10, which you work so hard on the first 2 downs to get to, you just give up the first down and stay on the field. So that's a little disheartening sometimes. The 3-man rush on passing plays, I don't understand that either. To me, those are disasters waiting to happen. Pressuring the quarterback always causes big problems for an offense, if you get there fast enough, of course. It's the number one thing that any quarterback hates. It's pressure and a lack of time to process the play and throw the ball accurately. So I don't understand the 3-man rush. I never played quarterback in tackle football, but I did play quarterback in flag football and where you can be rushed. And I know that when I had more time to throw the ball, I could shred a defense, whereas if I had someone on me quickly, I usually either had to run or make some kind of bad throw or throw it away. So pressuring the quarterback is huge, and the 3-man rush it blows my mind. I'm not a fan of it at all. The good things were the big stop on 4th and 1 in the first quarter that gave the offense the ball back in great field position. Also later, the second team defense had a big 4th down stop towards the end of the game, which was nice. Overall, the first team defense only gave up 3 points. Then the second team defense comes in and gives up a touchdown drive. I understand that you want to give your backups playing time and rest your starters for the bigger picture of a Big Ten championship and playoff run. But this defense could have been record-setting historically. If you look at the points the second team defense has given up through the season, they're right behind Alabama for giving up the least amount of points per game in a season in the AP poll era. I know from watching every game, as probably most of you do, the only reason they don't have that record is because the second team defense has played so much in blowouts and given up meaningless touchdowns at the end of the game. So they obviously chose the rest of starters and played backups instead. So of course they will end up just being known as another great defense. Yeah, maybe Ohio State's greatest defense of all time, but they could have been college football history's greatest defense if there would have been a different approach, maybe trying to focus on maintaining the level of points per game allowed. Also, I want to add, finally, there are some terrible calls by the refs, both for and against Ohio State, and that's nothing new, but something that needs to be pointed out because the refereeing situation needs to be discussed until it is fixed, or at very least much better than what we have now in college football. Now, I hate waiting for reviews as much as anyone else does, but the refs miss obvious penalties that should be called, and they call penalties that shouldn't be called at times. So there has to be a system to fix this human error, and hopefully this is something college football will address. So the Buckeyes did win the game, of course, as I predicted. They did win 42-9, which, for those of you counting, that's a 33-point victory. So that made me want to know so far on my weekly picks, and the Buckeyes 11-0 on the season. All right, the next game I picked last week was Oklahoma over Missouri. Oklahoma won this ugly game, but it was not a good game to watch overall. Both teams struggled, obviously, to score in the game. The final score was 17-6. There was a lot of punting, and the 2 turnovers Missouri gave Oklahoma were basically the difference in the game. I was watching this game, and the cameraman showed a woman on the screen in the crowd. And she put up an O and an H. Then she realized what she had done. And it was hilarious because you could see the embarrassment on her face. I mean, she was there rooting for Oklahoma, but she had accidentally thrown up the O and the H. It just made me chuckle and laugh. So I think subconsciously she's a Buckeye fan, and who could blame her? Oklahoma football is a struggle to watch. Both teams had very good defenses in this game and bad offenses. So that is what it is. If the Buckeyes were to play Oklahoma in the playoffs, the defensive scheme should basically be the same as Washington. Stop the run, corral Mateer, the quarterback, and don't let him run. Boom, game over. They're lucky to score 6 points, just like Washington. So after the Oklahoma win, I'm 2-0 so far on my predictions for the week. Moving on to a game that we care a little bit more about in Big Ten country, and that was USC at Oregon. Now, it was a fun game to watch, especially early as it went back and forth. It's very tough for any team to go into Oregon and win in their stadium. I mean, we know Ohio State lost last year in Oregon, and you think, well, big deal. They went on to the playoffs and they blew them out, which is exactly the point. Why didn't they do that in Oregon? It's a tough place to play. Of course, the defense made some adjustments, got better. The offense also made some adjustments, got better as well. But the big point is it is hard to win at Oregon. USC was in the game, most of the game, but Oregon kept scoring and kept them out and actually having a chance to win the game. The yardage difference was not big. They each moved the ball pretty well, but a little bit different. Oregon passed for 257 yards, and they also ran for 179 yards, whereas USC offense is very one-dimensional in that it's passing the ball. Now, they passed for 330 yards, but they could only muster 52 yards rushing, and that is significant when you need a tough, short yardage run and you just can't run the ball. USC did also have 2 turnovers, and Oregon had 1, so they were -1 in the turnover differential. And Oregon wins this one 42-27. And Oregon's on their way to being a playoff team. They have to go to Washington next week. I'll discuss more of that later. And I had picked Oregon, so that made me 3-0 so far on my weekly picks. Next game, conference we don't really talk much about usually, and that is BYU at Cincinnati in the Big 12. We do talk about them, but we don't usually highlight their games as games of the week. But I chose this one last week, largely because there wasn't a lot to pick from with the SEC playing their cupcake schedule, which I'll get more into shortly. I don't have a lot to say about this game, except BYU has a solid defense. They held Cincinnati to 14 points, and they ended up winning this game 26-14, and it was in Cincinnati. Cincinnati moved the ball equally as well as BYU did, but turnovers really hurt them and were really the difference in this game. They had 2 very different offensive attacks. BYU ran the ball for 265 yards, and Cincinnati only had 87 yards rushing, but threw for 300 yards in the passing game, and it just didn't get it done with the turnovers. Now, I'm not someone who believes you have to outrush your opponents to win the game, but you do have to have some running game that is effective and works for picking up short yardage, and also for the linebackers and safeties to play a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage to allow your receivers to get free and over the top. I mean, you do have to throw the deep ball every now and then as well to take advantage of that. But if a defense doesn't respect your running game, the D-line can just tee off and rush the quarterback, not respect the run. So you need a balanced attack to a degree, which is important for sure. I did pick BYU to win this game, and that made me 4-0 so far on the week. But then now we have to discuss another league I don't typically have in games of the weeks, and that's the ACC, and that was Pitt at Georgia Tech. Now, I don't know who saw this coming. Pitt looked terrible against Notre Dame last week, and Georgia Tech had a bye week. So everything looked like it was leaning in Georgia Tech's favor. It was a home game. They were well rested. They had an extra week to prepare. They were a 9-1 football team. Everything looked like Georgia Tech should win this game. But of course, that's not how it played out on the field. Pitt showed up fired up and ready to play, and they jumped out to a 28-0 lead. And every time Georgia Tech looked like they were going to get back into this game, after closing the gap 28-14, Pitt would make a play to further widen the gap and finally close out the game at the end with a run that resulted in a touchdown. Georgia Tech's normally reliable quarterback, King, who had 2 interceptions the entire season going into this game, threw 2 very costly interceptions in this game. And those were the difference between the win and the loss. So the overall, minus the huge turnovers, the game was statistically close, with Pitt edging out Georgia Tech in rushing yards. But again, ball security. It's not just a hot topic for coaches to talk about. It's very much a difference between winning and losing. So with this poor performance by Georgia Tech, I had picked them to win, so that left me 4-1 with my picks for the week. Here's something I want to discuss. So you would think, as a predominantly Ohio State show, I would get harassment from the scum fans more than anyone else. But believe it or not, it's the SEC fans who want to talk more crap, specifically how Ohio State hasn't played anybody. So I need to take some time here and discuss the SEC and SEC fans. First of all, let's talk about the first game of the season. Ohio State beat an SEC team that is in the upper tier of the SEC conference. Let's talk about how Ohio State is playing only Big Ten teams for the last 3 quarters of the season, with no control of how good or how bad those teams are within a given season. And let's talk about how Ohio State dominates every team they have played. And they're literally the only team in the country you can say that about. Georgia struggled against 3-8 Florida. And if not for a horrible call that got an official fired, they would have lost to 5-6 Auburn. Let's talk Georgia's non-conference schedule. They played Marshall, Austin Peay, and 1-10 Charlotte this past weekend. Let that sink in. Bama lost to 5-6 Florida State. Texas A&M was down 27 points and needed a crazy comeback at home to beat a bad South Carolina team by 1 point, who Bama also struggled with, by the way. Oklahoma barely beat Auburn and Missouri and lost to Texas, who, reminder, Ohio State beat. So what is your argument, SEC? You have done nothing to show as a conference you are any good at all. This is how good you are as a conference. In week 13, Texas A&M played Samford, Georgia played 1-9 Charlotte, Alabama played 3-8 Eastern Illinois, Auburn played Mercer, Texas played a 2-8 Arkansas team. And you could say, yeah, but they're in the SEC. Well, isn't that your whole argument for why Ohio State hasn't played anybody? Because they had to face lesser Big Ten opponents. South Carolina played Coastal Carolina. Clemson played Furman. I know Clemson is not in the SEC, but screw Clemson. And they feel like they should be in the SEC because they're on the same level as the SEC. And Tennessee played 3-7 Florida, now 3-8 Florida. LSU played Western Kentucky just to crack above a higher win percentage than their 6-4 they were going into that. Ole Miss and Mississippi State took the week off, so I can't give them a hard time. Everyone gets a bye week. And the only game that mattered in the SEC, really, Vanderbilt against Kentucky. So essentially, those teams are the pride of the SEC. I know some fans are going to argue Oklahoma, Missouri, but that game was awful, and Missouri is overrated. Period. So while the rest of the country is fighting for their conference and playoff lives, most of you in the SEC are either chilling at home or playing scrimmage games against teams your third stringers could beat if they played the whole game. So you and your fans should be embarrassed. But you won't, because you're not smart enough to understand why it's embarrassing. Let me show you what I mean. So I took the time to look up the IQ scores by conference. So here are the IQ scores of the states with the SEC teams and the Big Ten. The most intelligent state, oddly enough, in the SEC is Missouri, which, by the way, never talks crap on any message board about college football that I see, or rarely ever in the past several years that I've seen. Maybe they do in the SEC message boards, but I never see a Missouri fan talking crap. Why? Because unlike the rest of you, they have the intelligence to know who they are. The rest of you just parrot crap you hear from ESPN and Paul Feinbaum because you don't have the intellect to think for yourselves. Now let's talk Big Ten. Look at the differences. By far, the dumbest state is California, and we all know about California, so that's no surprise. But after that, Illinois and Maryland are the only two states not in triple digits for IQ points, as opposed to the SEC, who has only two states in triple digits for the IQ points. So when I get messaged on Instagram or this show or whatever the case is, statements that I make on any media and SEC fan, they want to argue with me, I already know your level of understanding is low. I have to talk at an elementary school level for you to understand. So let me make this easier by showing you the average IQs side by side. So as you can clearly see, the SEC average IQ is 97.9, which is just under the national average IQ. And the Big Ten IQ is 101.3. It's not even close. So if it's not clear to you, Big Ten fan intelligence level is superior to SEC fan intelligence level. So if you're a Big Ten fan arguing with an SEC fan, remember it's like an adult arguing with a child. No matter what you say, they don't comprehend it because they heard their version of the argument from a source that spews garbage in their favor, and nothing you can say will change their mind. We all know the Big Ten has won the last two national championships and is likely to win 3 in a row. The SEC hasn't won in years, nor even had a representative at the national championship to play the game. I believe that's highly likely again this year. So be calm and remember, they don't know any better. All right, now let's take a look at the current Big Ten standings. Indiana and Ohio State are still on pace to meet in the Big Ten championship. Oregon knocked out USC over the weekend, and it is most likely that Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon are in the playoffs. Even if hell froze over and scUM were to beat Ohio State this weekend, Ohio State would be in with one loss. Don't let the SEC networks make you believe anything else. That is likely not to happen, however. Other things likely not to happen would be Indiana losing to Purdue and Oregon losing to Washington. So I honestly believe Oregon has a better chance of losing this weekend to Washington than Ohio State has of losing. So 3 very solid and strong teams in the playoffs representing the Big Ten. Now let's look at the current SEC standings. Nothing much has changed after Cupcake Weekend for the SEC. Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and Texas did technically play meaningful games, but they all won. Mathematically, you have 6 teams in the hunt for playoffs, but I do not see Vanderbilt getting in unless they just absolutely destroyed Tennessee. But I don't even think they will even beat Tennessee. So you might not think it's fair to have potentially 5 SEC teams in the playoffs. And I wouldn't disagree with you because they are an overrated conference. But look at it this way. When they have 5 chances to win a national championship and they don't, that's even more proof and embarrassment that they are not the conference that they think they are. So I would actually welcome 5 SEC teams to the playoffs, and I honestly hope Ohio State plays 3 of them on their way to the national championship. Now, let's take a look at the current ACC standings. Now, the ACC is a wild conference because the committee ranks Miami as the highest ranked team. And for those of you that don't know, the ACC champion doesn't necessarily get in the playoffs if the committee ranks Miami higher. So it really doesn't matter who wins the ACC championship except for the trophy and the title. But they will most likely not get into the playoffs unless Miami loses to Pitt this week. Then it actually puts the committee in a tough position. Then you could have a scenario where a 3-loss ACC team wins the conference, and you will have to let them in for being the highest ranked ACC team, even though they may be 20th in the country, for example, which will also show you the playoff system is still a little broken, which I believe it is, because the automatic group of 5 spot is ridiculous. It doesn't matter who makes it in for the automatic group of 5, whether it's Tulane or James Madison, they're going to be embarrassed. Now let's look at the Big 12 standings. The Big 12 is basically down to 4 teams left in the race. BYU had a huge win to stay in the hunt for the conference title, and Texas Tech likely to be the team that they face. Now, if BYU and Texas Tech both win and go into the conference final game with 1 loss, regardless of outcome, both teams absolutely deserve a playoff spot. You can't punish the loser of a conference championship game, because if they didn't play it, they would be a 1-loss team and nobody would be questioning their right to be in the playoffs, except for SEC fans, of course, because they will likely knock out an SEC team if that happens. So the rest are most likely out. By the way, huge comeback win from Utah Saturday. I think it hurts their chances to make the playoffs because K-State ran all over them and scored 47 points, but they did do enough to pull out a win and stay a 2-loss team. All right, let's take a look at the AP top 25 for this week, and I will show my top 10. As I stated before, unfortunately, due to time constraints and me being the writer and producer of this show and my editing guy, Matt, who edits the show, I only have time to do 1 show per week, and this is recorded on Sunday. So I cannot go over the committee's top 25, which comes out on Tuesday night. But what we are looking at here, and that is important, is the top 10. Because the ACC winner and the group of 5 winner, or I should say the highest rated team coming out of the ACC, and the group of 5 winner will likely be the 11 and 12 seeds. The AP has been closely mirroring the committee seedings, or I should say vice versa, because the AP comes out before the committee seedings come out. So there's typically has not been a huge disparity there so far, at least in the top portion of the rankings. However, there's a difference between a home game and away game in rankings, and that will matter a lot come down to the last ranking of the season. The home game playoff atmosphere is otherworldly. Just ask Tennessee. They definitely felt the Horseshoe Energy last season when Ohio State routed them in the first round. Also, I need to add, Alabama is in trouble. I think the committee has a real conundrum with BYU and Alabama if BYU beats UCF at home this week, and they most likely will, and then goes into the conference championship game with one loss. Now, I would not at all be surprised if they bump Alabama and put two Big 12 teams into the playoffs. I also wouldn't be surprised if they do not keep Alabama in because of who they are. They are Alabama. But BYU would definitely have an argument for why they belong in the playoffs. So that is something to keep an eye on. They're 10-11 right now. Alabama plays Auburn. BYU plays UCF. Technically, on paper, neither win is a big deal. But if BYU goes to the conference championship game and plays Texas Tech close, which they didn't the first time, Texas Tech beat them pretty handily, they have an argument for bumping Alabama while Alabama's just sitting at home not playing. So just something to keep an eye out when it comes to these final rankings as we come down the final stretch. All right, so here are my top 10 teams, and I'm going to explain why I think it should be the standard. So number one, I have Ohio State. They played a Big Ten team, a 500 Big Ten team. Nobody can control how good or not good Rutgers is going to be at this point in the season, except Rutgers, of course. Indiana had a bye week, so you can't fault them. Both teams undefeated, look like the best two teams in the country. Texas A&M, I want to punish them for playing an easy game because that's what I think should happen when these SEC teams play a cupcake in the second to last game of the season. I think they should be punished, and it should show up in the rankings for doing so. I would do that to Texas A&M, but I'm a little old school, and I believe undefeated is undefeated, and an SEC team that's undefeated, so I can't logically bump them below my number 4 team, which is Oregon. Now, Oregon looks great. They played really well, handled USC really well, who destroyed scUM earlier in the season, by the way, for those of you that don't remember. So Oregon's looking very good right now. To me, they're the 4th best team in the country with only one loss. Coming in at number 5, I have Texas Tech. They're the best team in the Big 12, in my opinion. They have a great defensive line, which I've said many times, and that'll keep you in just about any football game. Ole Miss, coming in at number 6, they had a bye this week, so I can respect buys. You get 2 buys a season. Okay, they had a bye. Let it ride. You can't punish someone for being on a bye. I dropped Georgia to number 7. Why? Because if you're going to play a 1-9 Charlotte team, week 13, you deserve to be punished for that. And I wish the committee would do the same. It's the only thing that's going to make these teams make real schedules at the end of the season. So for me, Georgia drops to number 7. Number 8 is Oklahoma, who at least they played a meaningful game this weekend. I think Notre Dame and Oklahoma are fairly even as far as 2-loss teams go, but Oklahoma played Missouri. Notre Dame played Syracuse. You can't fault Notre Dame. Syracuse is an ACC team that absolutely destroyed them, but also I think Syracuse is a team that has given up. They just look like a team that quit. I think that final 70-7 score was less about Notre Dame and more about Syracuse just quitting, just giving up. And finally, coming in at number 10 is BYU. I actually dropped Alabama out of my top 10 for the reasons that I just explained. They were number 10 for me last week, but when you go play a cupcake team like they did in week 13 and BYU's playing a meaningful game at Cincinnati, who was a 7-3 football team, and it mattered towards their goals towards winning a Big 12 championship, and you're a 1-loss team, you deserve credit for that. So for me, Alabama is not in the top 10 any longer. And that, yes, that is a punishment for playing a cupcake team in week 13. Plus you have 2 losses and BYU has 1 loss. Let me recap. Number 1, Ohio State. Number 2, Indiana. Number 3, Texas A&M. Number 4, Oregon. Number 5, Texas Tech. Number 6, Ole Miss. Number 7, Georgia. Number 8, Oklahoma. Number 9, Notre Dame. And number 10, BYU. Hey, quick time out here. Please take a moment to just subscribe, comment, and like. If you do all 3 of those things, you'll really help me out in getting the word out for this show. Help me hopefully gain a larger audience. I would greatly appreciate it. So comment, like, and subscribe, please. And go Bucks. Okay, normally I would be doing a Legends in Scarlet and Gray, but I will not be doing Legends in Scarlet and Gray the rest of the season because there is just too much to talk about. I do try to keep this show under an hour to be respectful of you, the viewers, and your time. I want to do a segment now called My Top 10 Most Disappointing Teams of the Season. Now, these are teams that going into the season I thought could be a good team or better than they were last year because they were building on something, to an elite team, potentially national championship level. And in one case, it was the hiring of a big time new head coach. My top 10 most disappointing teams this season. So coming in at number 10 is Colorado. They're 3-8. They had the Heisman winner last year. They were the talk of the town. Granted, it was fairly annoying. I didn't enjoy all the Colorado love for a team that wasn't a playoff team. But also I understood Colorado had been pretty bad. They had gotten better. They had better players. And I actually thought Dion did a decent job in the portal. But this team this year, 3-8, just not good. I expected more. Coming in at number 9, I have North Carolina. You hired Bill Belichick, considered maybe the greatest NFL coach of all time, which can be argued because he had Tom Brady. But the fact is he's up there. He's considered up there, and you expect him to come into North Carolina and do some things. And they're 4-7. I didn't expect North Carolina to be undefeated by any stretch, but I did expect North Carolina to be much better than a 4-7 football team. They were better than that before he got there, so he made the team worse. Number 8, Boise State. They have a winning record. They're 7-4, but they were the favorite to be in the playoffs again this season, going into the season by many people, myself included, and they've just had a disappointing season by their standards. Because if you don't know, the college football teams with the best record since the year 2000, that's right, even through SEC dominance and everything else, are Ohio State and Boise State. They were actually tied going into this season with the best winning percentage since the year 2000. Now, because Boise State fell off a little bit and Ohio State's undefeated, now Ohio State is solely in first place as the best winning percentage since the year 2000, and Boise State is second, followed by Alabama third. Coming in at number 7, LSU. Yes, they're 7-4. They had to play a cupcake team to get to 7-4 from their 6-4 record. But this was supposed to be their year. Their quarterback came back. They had a great defense. They were supposed to be a playoff team this year, and they are far from a playoff team. Brian Kelly got fired. They're not at all where anyone projected them to be, especially including themselves. Coming in at number 6, Texas. What? Texas is 8-3. Yeah, Texas is 8-3. Texas was also the preseason number 1. Texas is also likely to be 8-4. Many people had Texas winning the SEC and getting into the playoffs as the top seed for the SEC, and they're not even going to make the playoffs. They're number 7 in the SEC right now. So Texas is a disappointment this season. Arch Manning is a disappointment this season, but he does not have a great offensive line. That is true, and that's part of the overall disappointment. Coming in at number 5 Illinois. Illinois had 17 returning starters. They should have, by all accounts, been up here as a 2-loss team, fighting for a playoff spot, maybe losing to Ohio State and Indiana. But here they are. They had beaten USC. They're 7-4 and losing to Wisconsin this last weekend. Now, granted, Wisconsin's on their way up towards the end of the season. They beat Washington. They beat Illinois. Those are very solid wins for Wisconsin. So kudos to Wisconsin. But Illinois should be much better than a 7-4 football team this year. Coming in at number 4, Kansas State. Kansas State, I thought, had this team to win the Big 12 outside of maybe Texas Tech, but should have been competing with Texas Tech for a Big 12 championship game. They're 5-6. They go to Utah. They put up 47 points, run all over Utah, but they just couldn't get it done defensively. So Kansas State, just a disappointment this season when I had them at the top tier of the Big 12. Number 3, Florida. Florida is 3-8. I knew going into the season, Florida had a tough schedule, and I knew that they would probably be around a 500 team, maybe a little better. But 3-8, no, that's not a good football team. And obviously it led to their coach being fired as well. And so they'll be looking for a new coach this offseason. And I don't talk about the coach's hiring situation because I don't have the kind of insight that someone like a Josh Pate has or a Joel Klatt has. I don't have those kinds of contacts or anything like that. I just know what I read and see from everyone else. So do I think Lane Kiffin's going to go to Florida? No. I don't. That's just my own personal feeling. I feel like it's either between going to LSU or staying at Ole Miss based off everything I've seen and read, but we'll see what happens. All right, coming in at number 2, Clemson is 6-5 in the ACC. They lost to LSU to start the season, which nobody knew at that point. Could have been a solid loss. But then we see LSU as a disappointment this season. And I had Clemson not only beating LSU, but going undefeated in the ACC and running through the playoffs undefeated and meeting the eventual number 1 in the national championship, losing the national championship, but making it to the national championship game. They have NFL level football players sprinkled all across that team. And there's only one reason that they're 6-5, and it's coaching. It's that plain and simple. It's coaching. So Clemson needs to make some changes there. I'm not saying Dabo Swinney. I understand he's like a god in Clemson, but he needs to make some changes with his assistant coaching. And finally, number 1, to me, the clear and obvious, Penn State. 5-6 on the season. Nice, really good, solid win this weekend against Nebraska, who's without Raiola at quarterback, who was 7-3 going into the game. And Penn State just thoroughly dominated Nebraska, but 5-6. You had the returning squad. You have multiple NFL players on your squad, a senior-led quarterback team. Obviously, he got injured, but that isn't the reason they fell apart. I had you playing Clemson in the national championship and winning the national championship based on following the formula that Michigan or scUM and Ohio State had set previously. So there you have it. My top 10 most disappointing teams this season. Now let's take a moment to go over my version of the FPI that I debuted last week. If you don't know what FPI is, it's Football Power Index. It's just my own version. It's really not that complicated. I again highlighted in red anywhere the opponents had a losing record, and you can see the level of competition that was played at the time. And I highlighted the loss record of each team in green if they lost to a 1-loss or less teams. I want you to particularly pay attention to Georgia and see why they're overrated. They did lose to Alabama, who is now a 2-loss team, and they have beaten teams with a combined record of 57 and 54, which is a +3 differential. And Georgia fans want to talk about how Ohio State hasn't played anyone who also has a +3 differential on their opponents' wins and losses, and Ohio State has 0 losses. So what is your argument, Georgia fan? The team with the best quality of wins is Oklahoma with a +13 in the win-loss against the opponents they beat, but they also have 2 losses. And that matters a lot. I left USC on there because even though they're no longer officially in the race, they were on there and we can see how they finished their season. Again, if you look at the FPI closely and what I have in red, Texas A&M, Oregon, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, and scUM have beaten teams with overall losing records. So things to remember going forward, because final record is not everything. A&M 0 losses, but their opponents are 48 and 53. So do with that what you will. You can see Vanderbilt's quality of wins is also very bad. So if you put everyone Vanderbilt has played against together, it's still a losing record, 60 and 62 overall. Same for Ole Miss, same for Texas A&M. Their non-conference opponents, which they beat, were 15 and 30. And the records of wins and losses versus everyone Vanderbilt beat is 43 and 57. But when Vanderbilt had to play good teams whose records are combined are 17 and 5, they lost. The same is true for scUM. The same is true to some degree for Oklahoma, because Oklahoma did also beat some good teams. Just look at the graph. Everything you see in red means somewhere they're playing someone with losing records. The only teams you don't see in red with any red are Ohio State, Indiana, USC, who is unfortunately knocked out, and Oklahoma. Everyone else somewhere is playing opponents with losing records. All right. Now it's time for my top 5 games and predictions for next week, except this week it will be top 6. And as I stated, I went 4-1 last week, thanks to the unpredictability of the ACC and which Georgia Tech team's going to show up that week. But 4-1, I was 46 and 21 overall prior to that. So now I'm 50 and 22 overall. Now let that sink in. That is the top 5-ish, maybe sometimes more, games of the week. Granted, I always include Ohio State, and yes, Ohio State's undefeated. 50 and 22 against the best games of the week. I'm proud of that. I think it's something that's pretty good. All right. The first game of the week, of course, is obviously the Buckeyes. It's the game against scUM. Buckeyes are favored by 12.5. They're 11-0 going into this game. scUM is 9-2. Ohio State averages 38 points per game, while they average 29 points per game. Defensively, Ohio State gives up 7.6 points per game, and they give up 18 points. Ohio State is 17-7 in the last 25 years, as COVID season was canceled by hairball. Otherwise, they would be 18-7. I expected Ohio State to win this game by at least 3 touchdowns. And if Day takes it easy on them, I will be pissed, and you will hear about it next show. I want a repeat of when Haskins destroyed them for 55 points and embarrassed them when they supposedly had the number 1 defense in the country. Now, we know if you stop the run and the quarterback scramble, you essentially shut scUM down. So I expect Ohio State to do that, just like they did against Washington, and win this game. This is the game we wait all year for, and assuming Smith and Tate will play, obviously that makes a big difference. I expect Ohio State to embarrass scUM in their big outhouse, at least by 3 touchdowns. If they don't do that, it's because the play calling was too conservative. That's the only way that doesn't happen. All right, next game to discuss is Georgia at Georgia Tech. Now, this would have been a tough game to decide had I just not watched Georgia Tech get beat by Pitt. But with Georgia averaging 33 points per game and Georgia Tech averaging 35 points per game against ACC competition, and defensively, Georgia only gives up 17 points per game, but Georgia Tech gives up 26 points per game. I do expect Georgia to win this game. This will actually tell me a lot about Georgia, because lately Georgia looks like they're rolling. They look a little better than they have. They look like they've put it all together towards the end of the season. And if they struggle at all in this game, then it was a fluke. So if Georgia doesn't win this game handily and dominantly, then I'm going to be questioning Georgia going forward. Next game, I have Texas A&M 11-0 playing Texas at Texas, who's 8-3. Now, believe it or not, Texas A&M is only 2.5-point favorite in this game. And Texas looked great against Arkansas. But who doesn't look great against Arkansas? They're 2-9, for God's sake. Looking great against Purdue, which scUM didn't do, by the way. They barely beat Purdue. So Texas A&M averages 38 points per game. Texas averages 30 points per game. Defensively, A&M gives up 22 points a game, and Texas only gives up 20 points a game. Texas had to play a game last week. Sometimes that works for you. It keeps you in rhythm. Texas A&M also played a game, but it was against lesser opponents. Sometimes that can hurt you when it's an adjustment to go from playing a bad team to a better team initially. But I like Texas A&M to get it done by the end of the game. I think Texas will keep it close. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe A&M blows them out. I don't know, but I just can't find a way to see Texas winning this football game. So give me A&M. Next game, Miami, who's 9-2 at Pitt, 8-3. Sorry. Miami is a 7-point favorite in this game. They average 34 points per game. Pitt averages 38 points per game, actually. Defensively, Miami gives up 15 points per game and Pitt gives up 24 points per game. And that's really where I see the difference in this game. I don't think Pitt has played a defense like Miami's yet this year, except maybe Notre Dame, because I'm really not sure what Notre Dame is yet, because the best team Notre Dame played that they did well against was USC, and they did do well. They forced turnovers and they won that game based off turnovers. So anyway, this isn't a Notre Dame game, but my point is Miami's up there as well defensively. I expect Miami to win this football game. Next game, Oregon at Washington. Now this is a game that Washington could win. A lot of things have to go right in their favor. They basically have to play a perfect game. The home crowd has to be just going crazy, making life difficult for Oregon. But Oregon averages 39 points per game to Washington's 36. And Oregon only gives up 15 points per game to Washington's 19. And overall, on both sides of the ball, Oregon is a better football team. And I do expect Oregon to win this game. But this is college football. Upsets happen all the time. I would not be surprised if Washington wins this game. But if both teams give their best performance, this game should go to Oregon. And finally, Vanderbilt, who's 9-2, at Tennessee, who's 8-3. Now, Tennessee's actually favored by 3.5. Vanderbilt averages 39 points per game. Tennessee averages 42 points per game. Vanderbilt only gives up 22 points per game, and Tennessee gives up 27 points per game. The way this game should go should be an offensive shootout. Now, a lot of times when we think that's what's going to happen, you end up seeing defensive struggles. I don't know how it turns out that way, that defenses who can barely stop anyone all year all of a sudden go play against the best offense they've played against and they step up. Now, Vanderbilt has 2 losses and Tennessee is the best offense they're going to play against. And I do expect Tennessee at home to beat Vanderbilt and both teams to be 9-3 when this game is over. So to recap, I have Ohio State over scUM, Georgia over Georgia Tech, Texas A&M over Texas, Miami over Pitt, Oregon over Washington, and Tennessee over Vanderbilt. Let me know in the comments what picks you agree with or what you think I am wrong about and why. Tell me why you think I picked so-and-so and you don't think that's the right pick, that so-and-so is the better team and this is why they will beat that team. Don't just tell me I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong. And again, I thank you all for watching and subscribing. Please pass the show on to other Buckeye fans that you think will enjoy this. And if you are watching and haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and help me make this a full-time living. I would love to be able to bring you live episodes and multiple episodes in the same week someday. So thank you for listening to the Buckeye Battle Cry Show. Make sure to follow me on YouTube at Buckeye Battle Cry Show. Subscribe to me on YouTube or listen to me weekly anywhere you find podcasts if you don't have the opportunity to watch the show on YouTube. Until then, bleed scarlet and gray. Go Bucks.